Now that we've been growing and observing these amazing plants, you might be asking yourself, Self, where did these cool plants come from? Well, you're in luck because today we're going to meet Professor Paul Williams and learn the history of the Wisconsin fast plant. Let's go visit Professor Paul Williams in his lab now.
Hi, my name's Paul Williams and I'm a professor of plant pathology and plant genetics at the University of Wisconsin in Madison.
Hi, Professor Williams. My name's Mr. May and this is my third grade class. We'd like to ask you some questions about what you do and Wisconsin fast plants to learn a little bit more about them. The first question we'd like to ask you is how long have you been studying plants?
I've been studying plants all of my life, ever since I was a kid. And over the past 35 or 40 years, I've become more and more interested in sort of the secrets that plants hold.
Oh, that's very interesting. Professor Williams, is there a special kind of plant that you like best?
I specialize in a whole group of plants that are called brassicas. There's a great variety of forms of brassicas. These have been bred or domesticated over thousands of years by humans for different kinds of usage.
Earlier you told us you are a plant pathologist and a plant breeder. We know a plant pathologist studies diseases in plants. What was your goal for being a plant pathologist and breeder?
Now, as a plant breeder and plant pathologist, I wanted to be able to put genetic resistance into these plants so that growers, farmers, and people all over the world would not have to spray them with chemicals.
I see. You wanted to study these plants to make sure that they stayed healthy. So, you used the brassica plants for your experiments. Did you come up with any problems while you were doing this research?
And I came up against one really major problem. The brassicas that you see in front of you all take about a year to 2 years to go through their reproductive life cycle or lifespan. That is, from seed to seed, through the growing, flowering, pollinating, and seed production.
I see, that is a problem. That would take way too long to do your research to wait for these plants to grow and produce seeds. What did you do to solve your problem?
So about 40 years ago, I got the idea as a plant breeder, maybe I could create a model plant that would reproduce, would have a lifespan much shorter than a year, and would reproduce, go through its life cycle in a very short time.
Okay, so you wanted to make a fast plant. What else did that plant have to be like?
I wanted a plant that would flower fast and produce seed fast. I wanted it to grow at high population density so I could have lots of plants in a small space. And I wanted them to grow in the same environment that I grew in. I didn't want them to have a very cold environment or a very hot environment. I wanted them to produce effectively, to grow in that.
Well, that sounds really cool, but where do you even start to find a plant like that?
Okay, so what I did was then I traveled around the world and collected brassica seeds from farmers and seed companies wherever I could find them.
What did you do with those seeds from those plants once you collected them from all over the world?
Of those thousands and thousands of plants, tens of thousands, only a very few among them were variable enough that they flowered faster than the common ones. And those were the ones I saved. There were a few turnip-like things that flowered earlier. Out of the hundreds of turnips, there were a few Chinese cabbage-like things that flowered. And so they were the ones that I pollinated. And I didn't pollinate them as turnips. I mixed them. And by mixing up the genetics of these, I was able to create a pool of plants, kind of a big population of plants that was even more variable than these. And when I grew that, I was amazed to find that a larger percentage of those plants flowered much faster. They didn't look like any of these vegetables, but that didn't bother me. I was looking for a small plant that flowered early and would grow well in the soil. So if they didn't grow well in the soil, they didn't flower. So that's the effect of environment. So they were beginning to adapt to the environment I created. And that's a very important part of creating this tool. Okay, so what I found is that when I intermated or pollinated the ones that flowered first, their progeny, their children, flowered faster than the parents. And that amazed me. That was a very exciting thing. So I picked the 10%, that's 10 out of 100 that I grew, that flowered fastest. And I intermated them. And what do you think happened to their progeny?
Good question, Professor. Boys and girls, what do you think happened?
Well, believe it or not, they flowered even faster than their parents. So the grandchildren were much faster than the grandparents, and the grandchildren were faster than the parents. So we were making what we call gain or progress from the selection of the fastest flowering plants. And after many generations of mass selection for the ideal type that I had in my mind, I ended up with fast plants.